Shabbos Kestenbaum, it's such a privilege and pleasure to be sitting with you here. You sued Harvard, you spoke at the Republican convention in front of millions of people. You are spending your time on Piers Morgan on CNN defending the Jewish people, Israel, and to be honest, a lot of what is sanity. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, I appreciate it.
So I'm going to start with the honest question. How did you get the name Shabbos?
So it's actually not that interesting. I was born on Shabbos, and my parents kind of figured, why not? I actually have 7 names. My full name is Alexander Israel X Yisrael Yekusiel Yakir Shabbos, and of the 7, my parents like Shabbos the best. But it's interesting because my mom is a real Tzioni. She would play CDs of Naomi Shemer on our drive to school each day. And my brother was born on Yom Ha'atzmaut, so his name is Independence. My dad was a Lubavitcher who printed the first Tanya in India, so my oldest sister's name is India. So we all have relatively unique and interesting names. I don't necessarily recommend them, but they're definitely interesting.
The 7th name for the 7th day.
Exactly. And I'm one of 7, so it works well.
Oh, perfect. So explain the story with Harvard. I mean, I have not spoken to many people. I don't know if it's happened. Definitely not in this. It's become a precedent now, as far as I understand. Why did you sue Harvard University, one of the most prestigious in the world? And what's the backstory and what's happening with it?
Sure. So essentially, there is no such thing as an institution that is too big to fail, meaning if one's civil rights are being violated, we have legal recourses. We have ways in which we could hold them accountable. We sued Harvard not because we wanted to. When I always say when I got accepted to Harvard, my immediate reaction was not, great, now I can sue them in a court of law. My immediate reaction was, great, now I can contribute in a diverse, pluralistic, non-sectarian environment. I can learn from other faiths and backgrounds, and I can also contribute my unique upbringing. And it became readily apparent even before October 7th that there was a double standard by which minority students were treated and Jewish students were treated. And example after example really just demonstrated that federal law was being violated. And that really came ahead on October 7th. You have 34 student groups at Harvard who are jumping out of beds on the night of October 7th, blaming Jews for the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. You then have the president of the university, Claudine Gay, saying in front of Congress on live TV under oath, you could call for the genocide of Jews depending on the right context. You then had acts of physical violence against an Israeli student at Harvard Business School, an employee who threatened me with a machete. You had a Jewish undergrad being spat on. I mean, real serious acts. You then had an encampment where certain Jewish students like myself were being followed on our way to class. So we said that this is totally un-American, and we decided that after exhausting all other recourse, all other outlets of mediation, going through DEI, going through the university president, we decided they are both unable and unwilling to change, so we're going to force them to change. When we filed that lawsuit, Harvard filed a motion to dismiss with prejudice, meaning they were asking a judge to toss out our lawsuit and to set a standard so that no Jewish student in the future could hold them accountable to antisemitism. When we filed an amended complaint, which is an update to our lawsuit, Harvard did the exact same thing. They never apologized for their behavior. There was never any recognition of antisemitism. They just tried getting it dismissed. And our judge, Judge Richard Stearns of the Federal District Court of Massachusetts, he issued a 25-page scathing ruling against Harvard, writing in part, quote, "The facts as pledged show Harvard failed its Jewish students. He tossed out Harvard's double motions to dismiss, and we were the first case in American history pertaining to the civil rights violations of Jewish students on a campus to be allowed to go to trial." And I'm, on the one hand, very upset and bothered that it took all this for Jewish students to receive equality and justice. So I don't know if the word is proud, but we have set, Kestenbaum v. Harvard has set legal precedent. It's already been cited by half a dozen other cases brought by Jewish students across the country. And I'm very proud of the fact that, yeah, Jewish students, whether it's UCLA or Maryland or wherever it may be, they are looking at the standard that we have reached because of our lawsuit, and they're saying, you know what, if my rights are being denied, I'm going to use all available opportunities to ensure that they are being provided. And that's what Kestenbaum v. Harvard did, and it is what is currently doing. And I'm in touch daily with dozens of Jewish student leaders from across the country, and it's very, very rewarding to see how many young American Jews not just are holding their universities accountable, but on a more global level are saying that I'm very, very proud to be Jewish. You know, this is my story, this is my people, this is my heritage, and I'm going to fight for that.
Amazing. You go back to Moses, you know, the leader of the Exodus and the greatest teacher we ever had, arguably. and he was walking as a prince of Egypt, and he saw two people fighting. He saw there was no one doing anything about it. And he got up, he stood proud, and he sits as a living example. And you look at the prophets, and you look at, throughout history, that's what we do. Is it Jewish values, you think, that animated this experience and that drove you to be able to stand up?
Oh, for sure. And it's funny you bring up that verse, because I spoke at the Christians United for Israel, CUFI, which is the largest pro-Israel organization in the world. It's not AIPAC, it's the Christians. And I actually, in my speech, I'd mentioned this verse, and I said it's actually quite interesting, because the next pasuk, it talks about Vayetze Bayom Hasheni, that after Moses struck the Egyptian, he then went out, Vayetze Bayom Hasheni, on the very next day to say and to see, what else can I be doing? He was not satiated with one act of good or with one prayer, but he wanted to cultivate an entire persona whereby he is continuously asking, what can I do today to better improve the situation of the Jewish people, to better improve my relationship with God, to better improve the world itself? And my challenge to this Christian audience, but I say it to young Jews as well, is the initial act of striking the Egyptian was good, but perhaps what was even more transformative was on the very next day, Moses said, okay, what else can I be doing? So when it comes to Jewish values, absolutely. I know for a fact that had it not been for the summer experiences I had at Camp Mosheva, had it not been for the warm affinity I have by virtue of going to shul every week and sitting next to my dad, I definitely would not have been doing this, because I get death threats weekly. I get criticized very often in the national press. I get really horrific messages from both the far left and the far right. And I would have quit a very, very long time ago. There's not much materialistically I'm gaining from doing this, but what matters to me above and beyond is not fighting against hate, but fighting for Jewish values, the Jewish people, the Jewish homeland. That's what animates me, that's what motivates me, and that's why I continue to be in this fight. It's the acknowledgement, the knowledge of that I am part of one of the greatest stories ever told, and that's the story of the Jewish people. And it's not always a happy ending, it's often a tragic and a turbulent history, but nevertheless it's a miraculous history, and we are genuinely living in a miraculous time. And that idea and those ideals were first introduced to me by being at a Jewish summer camp. And I truly wish and hope that every single Jewish American can experience what I and so many other campers experienced at places like Mosheva and Bnei Akiva.
So it's interesting you say that, you reflect on these camp experiences through these legacy organizations like Bnei Akiva. But Bnei Akiva, I guess, is different because it's never really sort of run by the next generation. It's always by the people that are then and there.
Yeah.
And there's a pioneer spirit.
Yeah.
We look at the libraries, we look at the universities, we look at the federations, we look at the youth movements, we look at the synagogues. You cited some of these. If you were sort of a philanthropist, if you were charting out the next path, the history of our future, creating the legacy, not just having a legacy organization, what would your advice be?
Well, first, let me again commend and agree with the question in Bnei Akiva, which is, I call it the future Jewish leaders industrial complex, where there's a plethora of organizations that we're training the next generation. And Bnei Akiva takes the approach of, what do you mean the Jewish future? What about the Jewish present? What about right now? And you don't need to be a future Jewish leader, just do it. Kum v'aseh. And that's what Bnei Akiva is, a youth organization for youth, by youth. You see that in a very real world applicable way. So number one, that is the method that I think all Jewish organizations should be catered to, not training for the future, but doing for the now. As it pertains to the legacy organizations and the Jewish nonprofits, it's obvious to anyone who's been paying attention since October 7th that at best they were unprepared for the moment, and at worst one can make a pretty credible argument that they led the American Jewish people to the situation that we are in today by not focusing squarely and exclusively on Jewish issues, by trying to pretend that we're just like everybody else, and if only we were politically oriented to an acceptable way, then people would like us. And I would say this: if you're a donor and you care about the future of the Jewish people, and you care about the strength and security of the Jewish state, and you care about the preservation of the golden age of American Jewry, then you would radically I mean, overnight, reinvest almost all of your resources, not into another Holocaust museum and not into another combating anti-Semitism fellowship and not into another multi-million-dollar gala. And I should say, I went to Harvard to actually study the Holocaust. That's my academic specialty. And there are great Holocaust museums, and people should go to them. But we don't need more. We just don't. What we should be doing, and it bothers me to no end that we have to make this argument because to me it's so obvious, is you would ensure there's not a single American Jew today who's going to public school because their parents can't afford yeshiva tuition. You would make sure that there's not a single American Jew today who doesn't know about camps like Mosheva or B'nai Akiva. We would double the enrollment for campers from this summer to next summer, at least. We would ensure that there is no birthright bus that isn't fully staffed. We would ensure that there is not a single American Jew today who does not know where their nearest Chabad or shul is. It's Jewish experiences. That's what matters to people. It's not another fellowship to combat anti-Semitism, because I got news. As someone who's often introduced as someone who combats anti-Semitism, A, that's really not what I do, and B, we're never going to eradicate it. It's one of the world's oldest hatreds. It's always unexplainable, irrational, and that's one of the consequences of living in exile. That's why just a few days ago we fast on Tisha B'Av. We wept and we sat on the floor and we abstained from food and drink because we recognized being in exile, not being in the Jewish homeland, has a lot of consequences. And one of them is anti-Semitism. Now, I'm not saying we should therefore absolve ourselves from the work of ensuring Jewish safety, but at the same time, it is far more important that young Jews value the land of Israel. They recognize they are a part of a people, that they understand what it means to live in communion with God. That is way more important than another Holocaust museum. It just is. And again, if you ask young people, they'll tell you that. The only people who don't seem to get it are the ones who are writing multi-million-dollar checks every year.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to hear and to say that, and I definitely value your opinion and think it's really important.
And sorry, let me just interrupt. And I get to say it because I don't represent anyone. I'm not paid to speak out on anyone's behalf. I'm saying it because I've seen it in real lived experience. That if you want to help me and you want to help young American Jews, then give them the experiences that they're asking for. They don't need more Holocaust museums. They don't need more fellowships. It doesn't speak to them, and it's not going to work. It hasn't worked. You know, the amount of money that the American Jewish community over decades has poured in to the combating anti-Semitism industrial complex, to the future Jewish leader industrial complex, well, what did it really bring us? Whereas at the same time, if you look at all available public polling, it will show that people have a strong affinity towards experiences, towards summer camps, towards synagogues, towards institutions of Jewish life and Jewish culture. That's what we should be focused on.
For sure. I think that part of that Jewish experience also needs to then instigate Jewish literacy. That's why it's so critical that you talked about the day school movement as well, because once someone's had this immersive experience, they also need to then translate it into the capacity to have the education that can sustain it in the long term.
Yeah, I mean, summer and the Camp Mosheva experience is only effective if it continues throughout the year. And the synagogue, the school, and the camp need to all be working in partnership. Because it's all part about molding and cultivating a persona for the individual of a real responsibility for the Jewish people, a real connection to the Jewish people. So yeah, absolutely. Mosheva and similar camps, they will provide the catalyst to it, but then it has to be sustained throughout the year. That's where the Jewish day schools and that's where the synagogues come into play. And if you do that, I've seen in my personal experience, right now, actually, my former campers at Mosheva are now the Roshei Edot this summer. So I'm sort of a grand counselor now. I'm very old. But seeing that, you know, to sound very old and cliche and boring, you know, it really does give me a tremendous sense of nachas and you know, pride and wow, look at what we built.
Incredible. And I think just to make the point, while it definitely makes sense that these educational frameworks and institutions can make a huge difference, we also, as parents and grandparents, can't necessarily purely outsource this. It needs to be reflected in the home. It needs to be seen. And you related before how people are just trying to fit in like everyone else. It's good to integrate, but we cannot assimilate. So the way that the home acts and the way we act as family units and what we show in our home, in our business dealings, etc., sometimes is the deepest lessons,
Yeah.
and then they get carried forward in these contexts.
Yeah, well said. I guess I didn't say it because it was a given, but yes, you're absolutely right. I think, I mean, you're the rabbi, not me, but I think it's the Zohar that says that anti-Semitism, anytime the Jews throughout history tried to assimilate and tried to show that, oh, we're just like you, anti-Semitism is used as a divine instrument to remind the Jewish people, no, you're not like everyone else. You have a different mission. You're not better per se, but you're different. And that's sort of what anti-Semitism, at least in my mind, comes to teach us, that yeah, you're not like the rest of the world. You have to be an Or Lagoyim. You have to bring in ideals like monotheism, like the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people. These are good values for the world to understand.
So I hope that we never have to invoke that again, and we can just be proud Jews on our own. We don't need the external threat to do it. And one of the steps you took in that right direction was really to get involved with the White House, to get involved in politics, to be a living, breathing example of what it means to own your Jewish identity in a broader context. Tell us a bit about that journey. What have you been doing thus far, and how did you get involved?
Sure. So in a nutshell, and I don't want to upset your viewers, I was very far to the left politically. Suffice to say, I can compare my progressive credentials to basically any Jewish person any day of the week, which is saying something. And again, to make a long story short, because of my experiences of anti-Semitism at Harvard and the inability to receive any sort of structural change with the Biden administration and my own party, the Democratic Party, I started slowly gravitating towards the Trump campaign. I helped accompany President Trump to the Ohel of the Lubavitcher Rebbe on October 7th. I, of course, spoke at the convention. I was speaking at Trump rallies. And the more I became affiliated with the movement, the more I realized I may not agree with them on everything, but this is a profound opportunity to affect real legislative change in a positive way for our community. So one of the things, in fact, the main thing that I'm working on with the White House is holding institutions of higher learning accountable. I am hugely in favor, and I spoke about this very publicly on the campaign trail, that I was supporting Trump because he recognized that while Harvard has abandoned the American people, the Jewish people never will, because American values are Jewish values are American values. I never once felt growing up that I had to choose between the two. I was very proud to be both. And as such, any institution of higher learning that violates the civil rights of any student, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, black, white, they should not be afforded the privilege of American taxpayer funding. So I'm a huge proponent, and I'm very thankful for the Trump administration for withholding federal funds to institutions like Harvard and Columbia and Penn. I'm certainly in favor, and again, appreciative of the Trump administration for lawfully detaining foreign students on our campuses who violated the law, who broke the terms of their visa, and they have forfeited their right to be in the United States, and in particular, be on relatively influential college campuses, people like Mahmoud Khalil. I'm very much in support of punishing any institution that values sexual orientation or racial identity over academic worth and intellectual merit. You know, we have seen a culture that cares not how you think, but what you think. They care about what we often call the victimhood Olympics, how oppressed you are. And that has led to really, really dangerous cultural trends, especially amongst young people who view, for example, the Hamas attack of October 7th to be justified because so long as you're oppressed, you sort of have carte blanche freedom to do whatever it is you would like. And the Trump administration is really turning the cultural tides on that once widely accepted ideal. So I'm very much in support of what the White House is doing with college campuses. I go to the White House when I can to not only offer my perspective, but to also encourage and to thank these members of the White House, members of Congress, for helping out, not just, as I said, not just American Jewish students, but really all American students. Of course, Israel is always on our mind. So I'm on Capitol Hill often with members of Congress. Unfortunately, it's now a lot more heavily Republican than Democrat. I wish I could say it's equally bipartisan, but that's not the case anymore. And there are specific pieces of legislation that we've been fighting for. And as I said, Trump has actually really delivered on these promises.
It's interesting on two levels. Number one, you said you don't agree with everything about the Trump administration.
Correct.
And number two, you said that you hope you don't offend our viewers. You know, unfortunately or fortunately, what happens is you say, I believe in what the White House is doing, or Trump. Like, that was a sort of sanctified, hallowed area, the President of the United States, the White House. It's become a real sort of not just talking point, but polarization point.
Oh, yeah.
How do you sort of suggest, on either side of the aisle or somewhere in between, people grapple with this nuance, which you clearly said that you're behind this, but how does one do that?
Yeah, and again, I say I'm behind it, but because throughout the campaign, for example, I tried to walk a tightrope. When I testified in front of Congress 3 times, and every time I did that, I did not endorse a candidate. I did not think one party over the other. I never said anything critical publicly of the Biden administration. I never said anything publicly when Democratic Congressman Jerry Nadler fell asleep when I was giving testimony at Congress. It was, even at my speech at the Republican convention, I actually did not endorse Trump. You could watch the speech. I mentioned his name once, and it's in passing. I tried to be as bipartisan as possible, and until it basically became impossible to do it. Because number one, I felt it was unfair when people were asking me, what are your stances on this? And for me to say, oh, it's not for me to say. Because as, Perkei Avos says, "B'makom she'ein enoshim mishtalios ish," and I felt that when there's a place where people strive to be a person, and I felt in this particular instance, there were not many young Jewish student activists who were politically involved, who were saying these are the legislative changes we need. And I felt if I could say that publicly and therefore endorse a candidate, then I should do that. But it's very difficult. As I said, I don't get bothered about the death threats. I don't get bothered about, being called a Nazi on live TV, which has happened. What bothers me is when I get disinvited from speaking at shuls because they say, oh, we heard about your politics and we can't have you anymore. That's what I lose sleep over, because the political polarization is not just in the United States. We're seeing it on a micro level in the Jewish community. I remember giving a speech shortly before the election to do with Israel. It was not a political speech at all. It just happened to have been before the election. And it was a Jewish function. And as I'm getting off the stage, a woman comes up to me, a Jewish woman, and she says, how dare you? You want to bring about a second Holocaust. I mean, that is a real danger that our community is facing, that other Jews can seriously believe that one's politics are so outside the Overton window that they align themselves with Adolf Hitler incarnates. So the message I would say to the Jewish community is that unity does not mean uniformity. Unity means we have differences, and differences are not only good, but they're vital, not just for a democracy, but for a people. Very, very good and healthy. But we should be able to hold 2 truths, that we can disagree, and at the same time, we're all part of the same team. We all want what's best. We all pray to the same God, and political differences should not alienate friends or families or institutions, but all too often, unfortunately, I've personally seen that is not the case, that it very much does alienate people, and that to me bothers me in a way that nothing else really has over the last year and a half.
Well, what's also frustrating to me is yesterday you were attacked on Piers Morgan in the same way that by a non-Jewish woman in front of millions of people, in the same way that this Jewish woman did privately in that space. And I think what we as Jews need to remember is that healthy debate and discourse is important, valuable, and vital. However, if we're going to disrespect each other to this level, then we're going to be disrespect on the world stage at that level. Yeah. Rabbi Sachs used to say, non-Jews disrespect Jews that disrespect their Judaism, and non-Jews respect Jews that respect their Judaism. And I think that it applies between Jews and Judaism and between Jews and Jews. And I think that is a critical idea. On Piers Morgan as well, one of the main refrains that he attacks with is, those 2 other prime ministers previously that are speaking in similar terms, about genocide, apartheid, all these terrible, factually wrong terms about us and about what certain ministers are doing, etc. And we can't get out of that because we are our own worst enemy. What is the advice that you would give to Israel in terms of the PR battle that we're fighting?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's interesting that Piers always brings up those 2 prime ministers, who I won't mention their names, simply because one is literally a convicted criminal and the other was a great friend of Jeffrey Epstein. But I digress. I put a post on my Twitter a few days ago, and it did quite well, where I basically gave 6 suggestions. And the background to this is I was part of a delegation with American Jewish content creators to Israel. The foreign minister, Gideon Sa'ar, brought us so we could see with our own eyes, for example, the Kerem Shalom border crossing, Majdal Shams, the Gaza envelope. And we had a meeting with him, and we expressed our skepticism and our reservations about how Israel is conducting the war of PR. We're not qualified in any way to talk about the war in Gaza and Yemen and Lebanon, but as it pertains to the PR, that is actually something that we know quite well because we're in that space 24/7. And I want to piggyback off of that last thing you just said about Rabbi Sachs Zatzal, which is the world will respect Israel when Israel respects Israel. If Israel tries to consistently placate to the West and tries to dictate military strategies based on what the far left on college campuses are suggesting, then they will not win this actual war on the battleground, and they certainly won't win the war for ideas. Israel has to be confident and sure of whatever military decision they make, that it is the right thing to do, and not because they're consistently kowtowing or re-strategizing based on pressures from the Western media. Having said that, I do think Israel has really fumbled the bag here. Number one, Israeli ministers with limited English skills should not be going on combative media for a host of reasons, but suffice to say, it does not help our cause. Number two, individuals like Piers Morgan, I'm not saying allow Western journalists unfettered access into Gaza because it is a dangerous war zone, because there are already accusations that Israel indiscriminately kills journalists, which of course isn't true. And if a CNN journalist were to accidentally be killed, God forbid, in the line of fire, we all know what that would do to Israel. What I am saying is someone like Piers Morgan, who has his audience is bigger than there are more people who watch Piers Morgan than there are Jews alive on planet Earth. And when he constantly tells me or other pro-Israel guests, why can't I be allowed into Gaza? Why can't I see for myself? Piers Morgan, this is my hot take, should be allowed into the Gaza envelope. He should be allowed to meet with Reverend Johnny Moore so he can see the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation delivering aid on a daily basis. Israel has already allowed Israeli journalists into Gaza just 2-3 weeks ago to do that very same thing. I would also suggest that Israel is the startup nation. It doesn't make sense that they have such bad PR. They should use the innovation and the creativity of the private sector and fund a 24/7 Israel war room of sorts so that you can very quickly and very confidently debunk a lot of the bizarre conspiracies and arguable blood libels that just pop up on a daily basis from social media. The Israeli government simply not responding to it, I don't think is a workable strategy anymore. I think they should rehire Eilon Levy. It was a terrible mistake to let him go. This is someone who can speak English well, obviously, who is charismatic, who can play to media, and Israel should be finding other Eilon Levies who can do the exact same thing, as opposed to not really speaking to the media, not holding press conferences, being quite evasive as to what their military strategy is. And I'll give you one good example. There are rumors that Israel plans on occupying Gaza throughout the entirety of the war. And the reason I say they are rumors is because unless we can hear it from the Prime Minister's mouth, and unless he can take questions from journalists as to what the strategy is, it will be very, very difficult for American Jews in the diaspora to try to defend tactics of the Israeli government without fully understanding what they're doing, because we're constantly being shut out. So ultimately, as I said earlier, we're on the same team. We all want what's best for the land of Israel and the protection and security of the millions of Muslims and Jews and Christians in Israel. But at the same time, Israel has to recognize that they cannot ignore the war of ideas, because that is a war that they are losing, and they are losing very, very badly. To be called a Zionist on a college campus today would be the equivalent of a gay student being called the F word. You know, it's a slur, it's a pejorative, it's a really negative thing. And I think Israel needs to recognize the problem before they even begin to figure out some solutions.
So essentially, like, they believe in the justness of their cause, and they think that's enough.
Exactly.
And ultimately, it's not enough, because
Exactly.
it's not so clear to people.
I actually, sorry to interrupt, but I won't say which minister, but a minister told me to my face when I brought up some of these ideas. He said, well, we don't need to, because the facts speak for themselves and the truth will prevail. I mean, I like that idea on a conceptual lens, but on a practical lens, it's just not true. That's not how the media landscape, certainly the social media landscape, works anymore. You need to fight for the truth, because we live in a post-truth world. People will not magically come to their senses because it's the right thing to do. They need to be convinced. You need to argue for the cause. And that's where, again, I think allowing someone literally like Piers Morgan to see for himself. He should go to Majdal Shams, and he should go to the Gaza envelope in Kibbutz Be'eri, and he should meet with hostage families and injured soldiers. And yes, he should meet with Arab citizens of Israel, and he should meet with Palestinians in the West Bank, and he should go to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and he should draw his own conclusions. I have more than enough confidence and pride in the state of Israel that once he sees all of those things, he will be able to make his own conclusion. I am more than confident that I will support the conclusion that he comes to. But what is Israel afraid of?
So what's fascinating about what we're saying here is that currently the truth is obscured. What we actually want to do is expose the truth. In order to
100%.
expose the truth, all we need is articulate people explaining exactly what's going on, not spinning anything,
100%.
and showing the spaces, the places where the facts are actually happening.
I mean, just that one trip that the foreign minister took us on allows me to confidently go to CNN or BBC or Piers Morgan and say, look, I literally saw with my own eyes 800 humanitarian aid trucks of baby formula and feminine hygiene products and clothing and medicine going into Gaza on a daily basis. Like, I saw it. I met with grieving parents who are Druze, who are Muslim, who are atheist. Like, I saw it, I experienced it. And Israel should not be afraid. And on the contrary, should be very eager to show journalists exactly what they showed me.
So you're young, you have been you've been attacked from the left and the right,
Yes.
from Jews
I'm
and
very
non-Jews.
bipartisan. Both sides want to kill me. That's my joke.
I apologize for that, for both sides on that. But at the end of the day, my question is, how do you nourish your soul? You're spending so much time, let's face it, dealing with very superficial stuff, because that's where the world's living currently. With the next news item, you bring a depth of perspective to it. But how do you nourish your soul? How do you come through that on a transcendental spiritual level?
Well, I'm honored you think I am nourishing my soul. That means I'm at least externally competent. It is, first of all, it's difficult. Like, I'm not going to pretend it's easy. It's very much not. And in fact, I spoke at a different camp earlier in this summer, and it was a more yeshivish camp. And I did a Q&A with the counselors there. It was an all-male camp. And they said, what can we do to be part of this combative media landscape? And I said, honestly, you're probably not going to like this answer, but I don't think you should be part of it. I think you guys are 18, 19. Stay in yeshiva, like, learn Torah, create connections with your Rebbeim, serve in the Israel Defense Forces, move to Israel. I mean, I think that should probably be the focus, not what can I say or do on social media that can help the cause. If you really want to help the cause, be the most educated, knowledgeable, passionate Jew you can possibly be, as young as possible, as early as possible. I travel across the country, and when students or the elderly or parents will come up to me and say, look, I may not be religiously observant, but I'm going to light Shabbat candles, or I'm going to send my kid to a Jewish day school, or I'm going to say a chapter of Psalms for a soldier. It's those small moments that I think nourishes me and allows me to continue going, because it provides a clarity of perspective. Oh, right, this is why I'm doing it. But having said that, it's very, very difficult. Being a frum Jew in this landscape is really not easy. And by the way, not just because they all yell at me, but also because I obviously wear a kippah, and that creates a lot of pressure. Because if I mess up, for example, on Piers, forget about it makes me look like an idiot. Okay, whatever. But unfortunately, I represent something bigger than myself. Fairly or unfairly, it's just how it works. Wearing a kippah is a statement, and people will judge other people in our community based on what I say. And that's a lot of pressure. So, I often joke, but I kind of mean it when, rabbis will text me. I'll say, say a parak of Tehillim for me, and maybe in your yeshiva. Actually, there was a rabbi in a kotel who just texted me, and I said, maybe leave a spot in the yeshiva of like an empty chair, and people will be learning for me so that I don't embarrass the cause. Because, I get super nervous. Not because I'm nervous, but because I'm nervous if I say the wrong thing, it's going to hurt a lot of people. So it's a lot of pressure.
It's interesting. I spoke when I was, younger about, something with the Pope, etc. And I found myself muttering the words from the Musaf prayer that the Chazan says, that the leader says, Hineni, that I'm, I'm not worthy of this. And I think the second that you feel you don't feel that sense of responsibility is the second you shouldn't be doing this. I think that's fantastic. And I think that it's amazing to hear the honesty and the desire to want to learn and grow more. And I encourage you to double down on that. I mean, in our conversations about the library that you grew up in, looking at the background of your phone of the Kotzker Rebbe, and the fact that you spent years in yeshiva post-high school, it's a real testament to that growth, that nourishment, and it's that soulful element that grounds us to be able to deal with the surface level.
Oh, yeah.
It's like these trees,
Right.
the deeper the roots are, the higher they can grow.
Right. Yeah, and I think we were saying this last night, but if Mosheva were to call me and say, can you be a counselor for 2 weeks? We need you to fill a spot. I mean, in a heartbeat, I would do it. And if that meant, I'm actually meant to be at the White House next week on Wednesday or Thursday, and if that meant, you can't be in D.C., you have to be in Canada, I would do it in a heartbeat. I mean, it's not even a question.
Explain why.
Because I don't go to the White House and I don't speak on Piers Morgan and I don't testify in front of Congress for the sake of going to the White House and going on Piers Morgan and testifying in front of Congress. I do it because I'm so passionate about Jewish values and the miraculous nature of the Jewish people and the Jewish homeland. That's why I do it. And if institutions that are connected and devoted to those things want me to be a part of it, it's a no-brainer. I mean, I would do it in a heartbeat. I'm not old, so thank you for saying I'm young, but one of the tough things about being in your 20s is you kind of grew out of being a madrich, so that part is kind of over, and you're meant to be a young professional and you have a 9-to-5, but at the end of the day, I mean, who doesn't want to go back to Mosheva and be a chanich again in Bnei Akiva? Like, that's what it's all about. No?
The truth is that I think what you're showing is that hadracha, being a madrich, being a leader, is not confined to a specific title. So while it's easier when I know I am in this student leader role or in this madrich role at a certain camp, that is really part of the incubator of leadership. That is part of the training. If these programs are to be successful, it's actually upon us as individuals, as young people in their later 20s, in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, all the way through to 120, to say, okay, I don't have a specific student here right now, but what is my role as a leader? And I don't mean that in terms of like another leadership fellowship. I mean it in terms of an actual lived experience in our life. And therefore, the same way that you've taken upon yourself, whether it's to come to a camp to share with some students or with some staff, whether it's to engage with individuals or whether it's to go to the White House and everything in between, each of us in our own ways need to think to ourselves, what is my moment that I can not just shine, but actually give over and share some of what I've gained?
Yeah, 100%. And I actually remember when I was a counselor in Mosheva IO, Indian Orchard, and the last day of Macha, which I think is kids going into 10th grade, when I was a counselor, I told my campers, and I'm sure other madrichim do the same thing, but I said, when we sign a contract to work in Mosheva, the contract doesn't really end at the end of August. It's sort of just continuous for always. I will always be your madrich. You'll always be my chanich, even when, I'm 25 and you're like 22. And I'm so appreciative that I've been able to continue so many of those relationships where my chanichim, who again are now madrichim or roshei edot or bogrim, they'll WhatsApp me or they'll ask to learn b'chavrusa, or they'll send me a picture of them at the kosel or whatever it is. That's incredibly rewarding. And as much as I say every young Jewish American should experience the magic of a Bnei Akiva summer as a chanich, it's also true that we have a responsibility to give back as a madrich and to sort of continue this cycle. It really, forget about the leadership and all that, but it really provides a sense of purpose and direction, of which I know without, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now.
Well, Shabbos, I know you said people attack you from different sides, but I think that's a testimony to you're doing something that's pushing something.
I appreciate that.
We truly are grateful for all you do for the Jewish world, the broader world, and that sanity. We hope you continue to nourish your soul so you can nourish so many others, and looking forward to many more conversations.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.